So Herod was fleeing from Jerusalem going south to Idumea. As they told you in the film, and as I told you earlier, that over here, right at this spot, Herod had to fight his first battle with the Parthians. And he defeated the Parthians. He became a winner out of that battle. But something also important and interesting happened over here. What was that? With his mother. What happened to his mother?
The carriage turned over. Did she die then?
No.
She was fine.
He thought that she was dead. And he knew that his enemies are following him from Jerusalem. And they were so close. So at one point, he lost every hope of getting to where his people, to that safe zone. What he did? Do you know what he did? He took his sword and he was about to kill himself because he lost every hope. The soldiers, the guards who were with him, stopped him from doing that. And a few minutes after that, he realized that his mother was not dead. So he carried her, and instead of going south to Idumea, he went east towards the Dead Sea. That was when he recognized, as I told you, the mountain of Matsara. He put his family there. He escaped through the desert. He went to Rome. He was appointed as a king in Rome. He was sent back with Roman troops. He defeated all his rivals in Galilee. He went back to Matsara. He rescued his family. Then he went to Jerusalem. And he decided to build the temple in Jerusalem. The temple had no significance for Herod. Why did he decide to build the temple?
Peaceful.
No.
Keep it peaceful?
Simply to satisfy the Jews. Because he knew that the Jews did not accept him as a king. Because he was not a Jew, and he was appointed as a king over them by the Romans, the occupiers. So he went to Jerusalem and he was like, okay guys, I'm going to rebuild your temple. Not only this, you think that the temple that your great king Solomon built was a beautiful temple? You are wrong. Wait and see. That was when he decided to double the size of the first temple for the Jews, and he built a huge structure on top of that foundation stone where Abraham was about to sacrifice his son Isaac, and that is considered to be the most beautiful building that Herod has ever built, that we will describe when we go to Jerusalem. But simply he wanted to be greater than King Solomon. Originally there were two mountains, the one we're standing on and another one over there. You don't see it anymore. And so Herod brought the engineers. He was like, I want to build a palace over here, and I want to see the temple that I built in Jerusalem through the window of my palace. Engineers went back to him, of course shaking, and they were like, Herod, you know, we don't want to upset you, but we have a small problem. That none of the two mountains is high enough to allow you to see Jerusalem through the window of your palace. And Herod was like, okay, what's the problem? Double the height of the mountain. This is what he did. He used thousands and thousands, probably 40,000 slaves that carried the rubbles from that mountain to the top of this mountain over here. He doubled the height of the mountain and he made it 1 foot higher than the pyramids in Egypt. Only 1 foot higher, simply because he wanted to be greater than the pharaohs. He made flat ground. He built his palace that you see over here. Then he moved more rubbles to cover the walls of his palace to make steep slope and to make it easy to defend. What you see over here, this was the main tower. Probably it was another 30 feet higher. The original one was 30 feet higher than what we see over here. And that allowed him to look through the window of his palace and see the temple he built in Jerusalem. When Jesus was on the Mount of Olives, and one of the things he told his disciples, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move one mountain from one place to another place. This is what he was looking at. And he was referring to what Herod did, because technically Herod moved one mountain from there to here. He moved one mountain from one place to another place. And most probably, this is what Jesus was referring to when he was on the Mount of Olives over there, because he could easily see Herodion from there. So this is how he built Herodion. This is a man-made mountain, okay? About the upper third, the upper 1/3 of the mountain is artificial, is man-made. It was moved from there to here. Okay, he built a magnificent palace, and this was his summer palace. So he spent most of his times in Jerusalem. In winter, he'll go to Jericho, spend the winter there because it's warmer. In summer, he'll come to this high place because you can notice the breeze actually. So it's cooler than any other place. And this is where he spent his summers. But that's where the tomb was, like halfway between the lower Herodion and the upper palace. That's where Herod designed his tomb facing Jerusalem, because he wanted everybody looking to Herodion from Jerusalem to see his tomb. And that's the reason in the first place why the Jews came to the tomb and completely destroyed it and smashed it, because they thought, we don't want to look at Herod every time we look south from Jerusalem. So they came and they destroyed that huge mausoleum that was built for him. Now, shepherds in the first century were considered to be the least of the people, the low class. Like, people wouldn't, like, you most of the times allow the shepherds to be in the towns, because they were considered to be the lower class. But when we talk about the shepherds that the angel appeared to, those were completely different shepherds. We talk about the priestly shepherds, the Levitical shepherds that raised the lambs that were sacrificed at the temple. You can see how close we are to the temple area. Just behind the hills over there, you see in the horizon there is a minaret of a mosque. You see the minaret of the mosque, the tall one, way far. Behind it is the Hinnom Valley that surrounds the old city of Jerusalem from the south. And that's where the temple was. And we know that this whole area over here was called Migdal Eder, as I told you. In Genesis chapter 35, this is what it talks about. Migdal Eder, the tower of the flocks, because not every shepherd could raise the lambs that were sacrificed at the temple in Jerusalem. Only the priestly shepherds, the Levitical shepherds, were responsible for raising these lambs that were sacrificed 1 year later at the temple. And as I told you, we talk about hundreds of thousands of lambs. If you want to refer to Josephus and talk about the 2.7 million Jewish pilgrims, we talk about 275,000 lambs, besides the 700 lambs that were sacrificed throughout the year, 2 lambs per day at the temple, one in the morning, one in the evening. So we talk about a huge amount of lambs, and this is where they raised them, in the little town of Bethlehem. And when the lamb was born, what did the shepherds do, those priestly shepherds do? Because the lamb had to be male, 1 year old, unblemished. So once the lamb is born, the shepherds would take the lamb, wrap him with swaddling clothes, and lay him in a manger for 40 days, the first 40 days. And they'll take care of the lamb to make sure and protect the lamb from any injuries, because it must be unblemished lamb. So when the angel appeared to the shepherds, he did not appear to regular shepherds, those like, low class people. He appeared to the priestly shepherds, the Levitical shepherds, and told them, you go to Bethlehem and you will find the child, the Lamb of God, wrapped in swaddling clothes. They knew exactly what he was talking about, because this is what they did. They wrapped those lambs in swaddling clothes. They put them in a manger and they took care of them for 1 whole year. Then after a year, they'll take them from here to Jerusalem and offer them as sacrifices in the city of Jerusalem. So when we talk about the shepherds that received the news about the birth of Jesus, we talk about the shepherds who lived at Migdal Eder, the tower of the flocks. And those were the ones who raised the lambs of the temple, the priestly shepherds. Now again, when you read about David, and David was a shepherd, most probably David was a priestly shepherd. This is where he spent most of his times, in these fields over here, taking care of the lambs that were offered at the temple as sacrifices. So all the caves that you see over here around us were inhabited since the 1st century. So this is a natural cave, one of the many natural caves that exist in the whole Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Samaria area. So these are natural caves where people lived 2,000 years ago. You always notice that whenever they settle in the cave, they'll make this hole or this opening to allow the smoke to go out at night, because they made fire to warm themselves up. And also that was the reason why they kept the animals inside the cave. So at night, when they go to sleep, of course, this is a man-made wall that you see over here. This is not a natural wall. Back at that time, what they did, they built a very low wall by putting few stones on top of each other. On top of that, they'll put some dry branches to make kind of a fence. And they'll keep one opening. And they'll bring all the flocks, all the animals inside the house at the back. And the family would sleep by the entrance over here. Usually in the case of the shepherds, one shepherd, they'll do it by turns, would sleep holding his staff at the entrance of this cave. And this justifies what Jesus said. When Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, nobody comes in except through me. Because there was only one way to get in, which is through the opening over here, where there was always a shepherd. So nobody comes in except through me. And so this is a typical 1st century house. This is where people lived 2,000 years ago. So the idea, as I explained to you, that when Joseph brought Mary and they went to Bethlehem, he was hosted by one of his relatives, but there was no place for them at the inn, at the guest room, at the living room, the guest chamber. And so they moved to the back of that house where the animals were, and that's where Jesus was born, in that stable. For the prayer. So we're going to go down, guys. This is what we call the grotto of the Nativity. At the end of the steps, when we get down to the bottom of the steps, on your right-hand side, you will get to see the 14 points silver star that marks the exact spot where Jesus was born. That's on the right side. You can kneel down, you can touch it if you want to. On the left, there is a smaller chapel that we call the chapel of the manger. That's where the actual manger was displayed. So that is what we call the chapel of the manger, or the chapel of the wise men. It's the place where the wise men came and presented their gifts to Jesus. So this is what we're gonna see over here. This is only the back of the cave. If you remember, as I explained to you, this is not the whole cave. This is the back of the cave where the animals were. Now what you see over here, guys, this is what we call the chapel of Saint Jerome. Saint Jerome was one of the monks who came to Bethlehem, and he lived in that cave for more than 30 years. And he was the one that translated the Old and the New Testament into the Latin language. And his translation is known as the Vulgata, or the Vulgate. And because of him, we have the Bible in all the different languages nowadays. So he was the one that did the translation, and he lived in there. That's where he finished the translation. At the corner, you see a tomb. That's his tomb. He was buried over here. He wanted to be buried over here. He made his own tomb. Now, if you look at these minor caves, especially this one over here, you will get to see first century tombs. See the tombs? Those are first century tombs. That's where the bodies would be laid. And a lot of people believe that the children, the innocents of Bethlehem who were massacred by Herod the Great, were buried at these caves over here. Now, if you look up here, you see the man-made wall. This is an artificial wall. On the other side of this wall is the star where we were. That is the birthplace of Jesus. So it's on the other side of this wall. So the cave was divided. Okay?